and we're live with the second panel discussion of the day. We're going to be talking about making sustainability transparent and explainable. And with us is Leonie Engemann and Prasad Yalamanchi. If you'd like, please provide us with a brief introduction and we can start defining and shaping this discussion.
Should I start?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Hi, my name is Leonie. I'm from the southern part of Germany, and I've done my bachelor's and master's in geoinformatics. So I'm a big geospatial data nerd. I love to play around with data in a logically and creative way. And so it was a pleasure to to make a deep dive into supply chain networks from a spatial point of view for my master's thesis, and I'm really excited to be here.
Thank you, Leonie. Prasad, would you like to go?
Yep. Thank you, Joaquin. Thanks, Leonie. It's very interesting background that I hear from Leonie. Uh, so my name is Prasad Yalamanchi. I'm the founder CEO of Lead Semantics. We are a company headquartered in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, in the U.S. on the Eastern uh, time zone. We are the developers of a tool called Text Distill. It is a hybrid over generative AI and semantic technology. Um, to break it down, what it does is it takes in unstructured data of all kinds. It's text, images, audio, video, and then breaks it down, introduces structure to it, and produces a fully conformant RDF knowledge graph. And this is conformant to an ontology that drives the pipeline, this text distill pipeline. And this tool is already in production in various places in different industries at that. And given that generative AI and semantic technologies are broad, applicable in literally every aspect of our commerce, in every vertical, and so we are finding really that traction at this time. And I'm thrilled to be part of this panel, especially related to the supply chains and the geospatial aspect of the supply chains and the explainability and all of those things, which are pretty relevant to knowledge graphs, as well as supply chains in ESG space. So looking forward to it. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, I think as we were discussing before we started hitting record, the objective of this conversation is sort of to address the need for transparency and explainability in sustainability, particularly through the angle of supply chains. Um, Leonie, would you like to talk a little bit about the work that you did with the fashion knowledge graph and some of the insights that you gathered from uh, piecing together all these different sources of information?
Yeah, so I tried to model a textile supply chain from a German outdoor brand, and model all of the actors of the supply chain network together with various kinds of risk, geospatial risk, political risks, climate risk. I tried to model social risk. This was not really not really a success. And what it showed it was that it's super important to have it at one place, to have all the data together, and so that there also different actors that are looking at this graph, like different teams from a company, can have an overview, and also from this data model learn from the whole supply chain, and even just see what is actually going on. So what is in their data, because they just see it like in an Excel spreadsheet, but all those relationships, and there are a ton of relationships, um, they are not visible. So I think this is super important for transparency for a company to just even know what's going on in their supply chain.
Thank you, Leonie. Prasad, usually, well, not usually, your main area of expertise and focus in your current work is working with unstructured data.
Mhm.
So, is there anything else that you can bring on
Yeah.
in around that, the consumption of structured data and the difficulties of wrangling that into a usable format?
Absolutely, very nicely put. Um, uh, in fact, and unstructured data and sustainability, they almost go hand in hand. Sustainability and ESG domain is replete with unstructured data. On the one hand, you have these regulations and compliance requirements, which are onerous and enormous, depending on the geography that you are trying to work with. And these are like reams and reams of text documents and all the stipulations and so on that need to be addressed in the way that you submit your reports and so on and so forth on a periodic basis. And on top of that, these companies that are involved in this practice of sustainability and ESG, they have their own public relations that they would have to deal with, the communications aspect of it to the stakeholders at large, the customers, for example. The fashion industry is a big area. They would have to really address the PR aspects of their business in many ways, because that kind of changes the approach to how people view these products, and probably weigh them differently if they know certain aspects of the supply chain is questionable and it's not as clear and evident, right? And so and on and on. So the data itself is pretty messy and in huge volume, and the variety of data is that much high. I mean, there are tables and complicated tables and structures and images and things like that. All of them have information that needs to be collected in the first place, extracted, and properly organized so that you draw connections among them to see any patterns that are of importance, that do they raise past the threshold that trigger a certain warning, or maybe some decisions to be made, some reporting to be had, so on and so forth. So it's a massive problem, and in that sense, when you are extracting this data out of a pile of unknown stuff, you do want to know, what you extracted. Is it really coming from, this pile, and where is it coming from? And when you do locate where it is coming from, does it make sense? Does it explain that this is indeed the right thing that you're looking at, with the right meaning associated with it? And hence the explainability becomes extremely critical. Otherwise, you would not put your confidence behind this, extracted data.
Part of the difficulty in wrangling all this data, not just because it's an unstructured data, is accessibility to it.
Mm.
Leonie was making a very good point that it takes a very persuasive or special circumstance to be able to access certain types of information that belongs to private institutions.
Mm.
Governments are making that a little easier with their enforcement of these ESG guidelines and ESG reporting mandates. But other than that, I mean, you're sort of left to dig up whatever publicly available information is available on these different actors, and sometimes it doesn't let you create the relationships or see how people are involved with each other in any kind of business dealings. So, is there anything you'd like to talk about from that standpoint? Gaining access to data so you can
Right.
start plotting relationships.
I'll just add a minute in there. That's such an important point, especially in ESG space. One classic example that comes to mind is this so-called greenwashing, right? Companies, they claim that they are doing this. Maybe a fashion label is claiming that there is no unethical labor, whatever the claims may be. Uh, you know, but yet it is their claims. They are so they can say whatever they want. They can submit all kinds of reports to regulatory bodies and this and that. But then there is this so-called alternate data, which is the social media. For example, if they are really poaching some wild animal that is conserved and they should not be doing so, maybe a local organization is reporting on it. Maybe there is a local journalist that is kind of getting into it, eco journalist that probably put out a newsletter somewhere. So all this kind of gets into the social, the media as such. So this is so-called the alternate data that is available nonetheless these days, with the internet being so prevalent and accessible. News is one other channel. And then industry reports and things like that. So all this data, if you put it together, so this becomes your alternate source of reality, and you can overlay that on top of what the company's claims may be, and then see some missing gaps be filled. There is a prospect for that, and that's actually a huge aspect of ESG reporting as well.
Yes, and it offers way more information. But my background is like every information or data is like you can measure it, you can calculate it, but all those insights, especially like the social ones on the conditions, you cannot measure them. You need some kind of reporting, and then this is text. And also, if you've got some data, especially like when I'm talking of information from the German government, they've got like a data section on their website, and then there's only PDFs. So there's no way around it.
I think
Absolutely.
I think in your field of work, Leonie, and your specialized skill set, it's a bridge to making things a little bit more visible.
Yeah,
Because a person can read things all they want, all day, every day, but people can't readily see the connections between things unless they consume all that information over a period of time, or they can arrest and interrogate a visual artifact like a map, right?
yeah,
Much better if it's annotated with these koalas got beaten up to make these hoodies, and the Congo and this other thing happened over here. Um, so, what are your thoughts in making this converting all this textual data into usable formats so that people can make better decisions off of these sustainability efforts?
well, I think, I mean, yes, it's really graph based here, but I love the idea of building a graph out of it and then connecting it to the data I've got, and then to really make use of it, and then to see like those real connections, and that I was not aware that there are so many relationships going on. So I think crafts are a cool way to make this visible.
Yeah,
Prasad.
it's yeah. I mean, that is the most use out of a graph. I mean, if you look into it, the nodes of a graph are visible things. They can be visible things, whereas the connections between them are abstract. It's not like in real life there is a string attached to each of the relationship that we try to talk about, right? That you can follow through. These are abstract. The connections are abstract. None of the data structures other than a graph has a mechanism to make it explicit. And in doing so, now it allows for one to build on top of this structure now that is already holding the relationships in an explicit manner, as opposed to carrying all that burden in your mind in terms of these abstract connections that are not visible. Now you have made them visible, so your graph is actually pointing to these two are connected this way, and this particular node in this graph is connected to the next one, by this relationship that's already explicitly there. Now your brain is clear to kind of think of the next thing to do with it, versus if that is not there, if it's only a table, for example, you would have to keep those relationships in your mind, and so half your brain is kind of just tied up handling that. And so now the same thing, you transport that into an algorithmic thing. So now algorithms, in order to make sense or layer a next layer of logic, traversal is like the biggest and the easiest thing that they can do with these graphs. And traversals of a graph themselves will produce enormous amount of logic, depending on which paths to take, how many segments to cross. There may be a meaning associated with it, with real life parallel to it. And the underlying logic to that is just traversals. There's no additional logic, no series of code that you need to plan for. And so graphs are extremely, I mean, the most useful artifact since the tables, I would say. Yeah.
Yes,
So,
and it opens up many more opportunities for new questions and new insights that you are not able, like in in a nice way, to get to
Yeah.
tackle that data.
so you're both involved in the construction of knowledge graphs, whether it's through the use of spatial data, geoinformatics, or unstructured data. But ultimately, you do create this artifact and make it accessible through a particular platform. In Leonie's case, you use Neo4j and you consumed Esri geodata sets,
Yeah.
or even the data sets that you retrieve from these companies, and you created an interface where people can visualize maps and filter through conditions. Prasad, you consume unstructured text. You construct ontologies that get spin up into a knowledge graph when you feed it data, and you create a queryable interface. What has been the impact of employing these solutions now that they are visibly accessible? Have you received any particular feedback? Have you
Mhm.
seen any remarks that stand out to you?
Yeah.
sh- do you want to, or should I start?
Yeah, go ahead, Leonie. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, therefore, you do not even need a graph, but for a company itself, it was just interesting to see where their factories are located. Um, so this was like something really basic, but this was just, yeah, interesting to see for them. Ah, okay, it's this and there. But then also see the connection to the materials, to the products, to all the different stages of the supply chain, because this was something they were not able to see with their massive Excel monster. And this is, yeah, this is, in my opinion, this is only manageable with a graph. This many relationships to display them, and also to make it, to show it to somebody. But then it's also yeah, quite challenging to present this graph to a user in a way that it's not overwhelming. And this is something I have not fully figured out how to do it, because then I'm coming back to like, okay, I can create a table out of it or something like that. But having like those small parts of it that are cool to investigate, because the when you're talking to companies, they are always like, "Oh, that's so cool with the graph, and I like it, but can you do this for me without the graph, so I do not have to see it?" So I think for there, there's a need for better communication in smaller pieces.
Hmm. Very good point. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, so, if I may, Leonie, so what you are looking at is how to bring about a subgraph in a way that you communicate with this larger graph,
Yeah,
but pull this subgraph of interest, whatever the question that you're asking for.
yeah,
And that itself, given the smaller nature of the extracted subgraph, you are able to navigate, and then all the benefits of graph show up.
yes, yes, exactly. Like smaller subgraphs, but I have
Mhm.
not really found a way that it's user friendly.
Yeah. If I may, have
Yeah,
you in my talk, I just I don't know if you were there
yeah,
part of the graph. If you have seen, there are two interfaces to text distill. One was the full knowledge graph view, which you had this big connected, messy graph, if you will, and that itself
yeah,
will really scare people away and would be the reason why someone would ask for, can you show me the other thing? But if you went to the search interface,
yeah. There
you're
was
asking a
subgraphs.
question in natural language, and the answer is coming back as a small subgraph that you can just pull these, 5, 6, 7, 10 nodes that are interconnected with the edges. This subgraph is literally part of the larger graph. And this small subgraph is clearly answering your question. So you have the context of the question, so you can relate to what you are looking for, and it is interconnected in the way that you can make sense out of it. And not only it is interconnected to the things that you're looking for, it's also connected to where these nodes have been picked up from the underlying data.
Yeah,
So I
Would
think
that yeah,
whether you're talking about text or whether you're talking about a map,
yeah.
it ultimately boils down to the context window of what one person can consume in their frontal lobe at one time, right? Like,
Right.
um, I think what Prasad does with Texas though is quite smart. That it's query based, right? But maybe there is maybe you can derive a set of queries that are particularly relevant to the supply chain management aspect of it. That could be driving
Absolutely.
the chunks that you cut out
Yeah,
to
Mhm.
showcase the relationships.
I would love to do this.
Exactly.
I think, yeah, this would be. I love this part that you talk because I was thinking, great. So I need to further investigate it. I think that's cool to make it user friendly, but also like maybe I need to do some cutouts there, some focusing on the really important nodes also in the subgraph.
Right. Yeah. What we have seen, among the users of our tool, uh, very much like what I hear from you, Leonie and Joaquin, is that they love the nice, fancy graph, all these
Yeah,
complicated nodes all flying around, interconnected, and it looks complicated, yet you can maneuver through, but it is not as usable, that interface. It is usable by the engineers when they are trying to debug and make sure that all the aspects that needed to be extracted were indeed extracted, and are they labeled appropriately, are the machine learning predictions proper, and all that. So for debug purposes, that is extremely critical. The other use the big knowledge graphs come with in the visual view is that all the interconnections between documents, for example, it's explicit and it's visible, and you can navigate to what is common between this or document versus this other. And these documents need not be all text documents. One could be a video, one could be a document, another could be like an image file, another could be like an audio file, and it does interconnections appropriately, which I did not show in the demo.
yeah,
Right. Yeah. And that's one aspect of it. So that the knowledge graph has a role, as complex as it is. Um, the search interface, there is another aspect of search interface, especially if the backend is a knowledge graph, backend is a graph, the interface can be natural language a lot more easily than a structured database. Because language is really handling all the concepts that we are trying to communicate, and these concepts are interconnected, and that's how they carry meaning. So the interconnections of these concepts, the dependency of one concept over the other, it's all embodied in the text of the query, and
yeah,
they have a more or less a parallel to the structure of the underlying graph. And we work with semantic knowledge graphs most of the time. Uh, and they are much more so hand in glove with natural language. And so your demarcation that you are after in terms of figuring out what subsets of these big knowledge graphs may be that are relevant to your inquiry are better defined in language.
yeah,
You would say, okay, give me these this graph or nodes or these concepts, whatever, that are involved in this part of the supply chain with these properties, these attributes, and so on. Is the best way to communicate that to the system is in a natural language, and that can be readily or more easily than any other alternative technique mapped to the underlying knowledge graph, and then the subgraph can be pulled out instantly, like the way I had shown. Yeah.
yeah. Love it.
So I think we're addressing a very clear point here to anybody that has a technical background and is looking to sort of expose these data. I mean, plotting the data and making it visible and showing the relationships,
Mhm.
exposing the relationships between different actors and how they're located spatially or what they mean, what they represent is only one part, but it doesn't make information accessible. If you're handing someone a gigantic graph, it's like handing somebody a textbook of information. You're asking one question, you don't need all of that. So that
Yeah.
contextualization window is I think the missing component,
Yeah.
particularly in supply chains where you have multi-party, multi geographic areas, all different kinds of government entities exchanging taxes, political details, and any subsequent permutations of those considerations. Pardon me.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you have any
If
last
I
thoughts?
supply, I mean, if I can add just one
Yeah,
minute, supply chains are very exciting. They are like they directly visually they are like graphs.
yeah,
You know, and so if you have a technology that maps directly to the aspects of the problem itself, uh, gosh, I mean, you are a lot more at ease in terms of really handling all the nuances that may be part of the problem.
yeah. Also, like all of the background and context,
Mhm,
especially in complex supply chain where you've got like actors in different countries and or different regions of a country, then you hear like, oh, we do have like workers group or something like this. This might sound good in the first place, but maybe it's super corrupt, and you need to handle this differently. And this is very, very important to add the context. And I think therefore the graph is really a really good way for those dynamic systems that are always so time dependent.
mhm,
That brings up a good point as well. The multicultural aspect of managing a supply chain, especially in somewhere as complex as Europe, where you're transporting a good across many different areas and they're not speaking the same language. How do you keep track of holidays? How do you keep track of customs and local regulations as to how they manage the movement of goods?
mhm. And as simple as the measurement metrics uh, from across the borders. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, also all those regulation. Do we have some tax regulations going on? Could I get in some trouble here? You can combine such diverse data in one system, which is like a genius model.
Yeah.
Um, in your current work, Prasad, creating that ESG knowledge graph for some of the people that you're involved with, what are some of the insights that you've gotten from employing that in production?
So one observation with ESG is that it has a lot of terminology. The terms that are involved in the sustainability ESG space is enormous. Like for example, like the greenhouse gases, and it cuts across different subject areas, like the CO2, CH4, and like that. There are like chemical nomenclatures, the taxonomy. You would have to understand that the particular string manifestation of a chemical in the text is this way, and if it is written about or misprinted, you should be able to make up for it, because the text is, it carries all kinds of possibilities in terms of misplacing different things. Maybe CO2, the two is you expect it to be a certain way, and maybe there is a space in between, and two becomes a separate integer, and so on. And CO by itself is a carbon monoxide as opposed to carbon dioxide. And so you can mischaracterize, what you label it as. And so there are all those aspects that we need to, plan for. And this is where, the idea of a taxonomy really comes into play. And these were all kind of, little bit subjects on the side. But taxonomy, without taxonomy, I feel like ESG will be very difficult to handle. Ontology is excellent, but it is too much of it's a bigger hammer. In order to make it work, you need all the nails in the form of the taxonomy in the right shape and form and all that. Then you can start beating it down with your ontology techniques.
Well, thankfully, there's a lot of initiatives going towards arresting some of those
Mhm.
ambiguous terminologies. No.
Yeah. Yep, yep, absolutely. And so we have contributed a little bit in one portions of whatever we had seen so far, maybe several thousand terms uh, in terms of you know environment and social and governance and so on. About 6,000 terms that we kind of normalize, harmonize with what we have seen on the web. And then similarly, we have an ontology for ESG for extraction purposes, which is kind of, we don't, I don't even think it is an expert level yet, but it is nonetheless very practical. We are able to, glean through, hundreds of thousands of, articles that, float by on the internet and extract all the relevant things, as we have shown in the demo.
Leonie, did you consume any public available data or incorporate anything in addition to the private data you retrieved from the partner
Yeah.
the partner's data?
Yeah. I used actually a lot of that, especially like something that comes from the government on their risk evaluation of countries, and also found this Chinese website where you can monitor your Chinese factories, and they've got like all those reports on CO2 emissions and stuff like that. And for this, I would really take a deep dive into those text analysis tools, because this would bring so much value, because most of it is just text.
Mhm. Yeah.
Well, are there any last minute thoughts that you guys would like to share around the work you're doing and how you're contributing to making sustainability a bit more transparent and explainable? Prasad, you could start
Yeah.
it.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So clearly the technique of knowledge graphs together with generative AI is the approach that can probably get you to your expected explainability that you want in your workflows. Of course, there would have to be a lot more planning and with some skilled hands at it and with right tooling. But that is the technique. Just generative AI alone will have some shortcomings, uh, whereas together with the knowledge graphs is the right tooling, and which is what we try to kind of push into the market.
I think for me, it's just starting, um, and maybe as a role of a communicator, because there's so many experts that have got so many knowledge and data or non-data, but bring them together and make one great thing out of it.
I'm thoroughly excited to see what's going to come after this presentation and just this event and see what kind of projects you guys get involved with. You both have a very specialized skill set, and you know, it's sort of a special role to be able to play the integrator of knowledge
Mhm.
across not just within an organization, but across multiple organizations, multiple parties, even just taking the things that are publicly available and putting those together. There's just a massive source of value creation for all parties involved.
Right. And just as a parting thought, one of the big values of semantic knowledge graphs is the RDF is a standard way of encoding the data, and a lot of government data is being published in that format, and so you would have ready access to a lot of that data that can really enrich your analytics and so on.
Well, thank you very much, Leonie. Thank you very much, Prasad, for this wonderful panel. We'll have to tune in next year or sometime sooner to do the follow up. But yeah, I appreciate it.
Thank you
Thank
so
you so
much,
much for
Joaquin. Nice
organizing.
meeting you, Leonie.
Yeah,
Enjoyed your presentation. Yeah.
you too. Thank you